There are families that keep score and families that pretend they don't. Mine had been keeping score since before I was old enough to understand the game. The difference was that only one of us was ever on the board. My name is Delia Ravenel. I am 43 years old. I am a developmental editor. I have spent 17 years working with writers, shaping their sentences, studying their structures, sometimes rebuilding a manuscript from the ground up while the author gets the byline and I get the acknowledgments page, if that. I know what it means to do the invisible work. I learned it young. The Thursday my father called to tell me we were celebrating my brother Patrick's promotion, I was sitting at my desk in the back room of my Nashville apartment with a glass of water, a red pen, and a manuscript that was due back to my author in 4 days. I already had a confirmed booking for a private room at the Hartwell Grill on Commerce Street. I had 51 RSVPs. I had not told a single person in my family. I said, "That's great, Dad. Tell me more." He told me more. I listened. I did not interrupt. I did not mention the room on Commerce Street. Not yet. Patrick is 4 years older than me and has always moved through the world with the certainty of a man who has never been asked to prove anything. That certainty was built brick by our father, Gerald Ravenel, who decided sometime around Patrick's 9th birthday that Patrick was the one who was going to make the Ravenel name mean something. I want to be fair about my father because fairness is something I believe in even when it costs me. He is not a bad man. He is a man who had plans for his own life that didn't work out, and somewhere in his 50s he made the quiet decision to transfer those plans onto Patrick's shoulders without asking Patrick whether he wanted them.
My father wanted to be a businessman.
He wanted the office, the title, the table at the restaurant where people knew his name. He got 31 years as an insurance adjuster and a retirement party in a conference room with a sheet cake and a card everyone signed. He loves my mother. He is faithful and decent, and he mows his neighbor's lawn when the neighbor has a bad knee. He is also, when it comes to his children, almost entirely blind on one side. He has never once asked what I do for a living, not in the way that wants an answer. I have told him, several times, across several years, I am a developmental editor. I work with authors, mostly nonfiction, some literary fiction at the stage before a manuscript goes to a publishing house. I help writers find what their book is actually about. I have been doing this for 17 years. My name is in the acknowledgments of 23 published books. 3 of those books appeared on bestseller lists. 1 won a prize. My father's standard response, across all of these 17 years and all of those conversations, has been some version of, "That's nice, honey. Have you thought about going back to school for something more stable?" Patrick, meanwhile, has moved through 4 jobs in 6 years. Each one announced with a phone call from my father. Each one celebrated with dinner. The promotion being celebrated now, regional accounts manager at a logistics company, was the kind of title that sounds like something and means approximately nothing, the kind that gets handed to people who have been around long enough and haven't done anything egregious enough to let go. I know this because I looked it up. I know this because I look things up. That is what I do. I am a person who reads carefully and checks her sources and does not announce things she hasn't verified. My launch party was for a book I had spent 14 months editing. The author's name was Sylvia Okafor. She is a memoirist who writes about family systems and inherited silence, and the way some daughters spend their whole lives translating themselves into languages their fathers were never going to learn anyway. Her first book sold 42,000 copies. This one, the one I had spent 14 months building with her, sentence by sentence, argument by argument, through 11 drafts and 3 significant structural overhauls, was already generating attention. Her publisher had sent advance copies. 2 newspapers had asked for interviews. Sylvia had asked me to host the launch event. She said she wanted the people who had believed in the book from the beginning in the room. She gave me a list of 20 names. I added 31 more, colleagues, writers I'd worked with over the years, a handful of people who had sent notes about the first book and whom Sylvia had never met. 51 confirmed. The Hartwell Grill on Commerce Street. Private dining room. Thursday, the 19th of March. 7 o'clock. The same Thursday my father had booked a table at Caruso's on 5th Avenue, 8 blocks away, to celebrate Patrick's new title. I found out about my father's dinner the way I find out about most things in my family. Not directly. My mother called me on a Sunday the way she calls me every Sunday, and somewhere in the middle of the call she mentioned it the way you mention something you assume the other person already knows. She said, "You'll be at Caruso's Thursday, right? For Patrick?" I said, "What's Thursday?" She said, "Oh, your father didn't call you?" He had not called me. He called the next evening. It was a Monday, 6:47 p.m. I had just come in from a walk. I walk most evenings, a 40-minute loop through the neighborhood near my apartment, and I was still in my coat when the phone rang. The navy wool coat I've had for 6 years, the one with the deep pockets I can put my hands all the way into. I answered it standing at the kitchen counter still wearing it. My father said, "Delia, I've been meaning to call. We're doing a dinner for Patrick on Thursday. Caruso's, 7 o'clock. He got a promotion, regional accounts manager. He's really stepping up." I said, "That's great, Dad." He said, "He's finally doing something with his life." I want to stop here for a moment because that sentence deserves more than I gave it in the moment. He's finally doing something with his life. Patrick is 47 years old. He has a life.
He has always had a life.
The sentence my father meant was, Patrick is finally doing something with his life that I can explain to people at dinner, which is a different sentence entirely. I said, "I'm sure he worked hard for it." My father said, "We'd love to have you there. 7 o'clock. I said, "I might not be able to make it, Dad. I have something on Thursday." He said, "What do you have?" I said, "A work event." He made a sound that I can only describe as skeptical. The sound a person makes when they don't believe the work you're describing is real work. He said, "Can't you move it?" I said, "No." He said, "Delia, it's your brother's promotion dinner. He'd want you there." I said, "Dad, I have a confirmed booking and 51 people coming. I can't move it." He said, 51 people? For what?" And here is where I made a decision I had been turning over for 3 weeks. I had the option to explain. I could have told him about Sylvia. I could have told him about the 14 months and the 11 drafts and the advance copies and the newspaper interviews. I could have laid it out the way I've laid it out before, calmly and specifically, and waited to see if this time it landed. I did not do that. I said, "It's a book launch. One of my authors. I can't reschedule." He said, "A book launch." The flatness in the way he said it, like I'd said a pottery class or a neighborhood bake sale. The complete absence of curiosity about whose book, what my role in it might be. He said, "Can't someone else handle it?" I said, "I'm the editor, Dad. It's my event." He said, "Well." A pause. "I hope you'll at least try to stop by Caruso's after." I said, "I'll do my best." I hung up and I stood at my kitchen counter still wearing the navy wool coat, and I looked at the Earl Grey tea tin on the shelf above the stove, the one I've had since graduate school with the faded label and the small dent in the lid from the time I dropped it. I make a cup of tea most evenings. I made one then. I stood there and I drank it and I thought about the word finally. He's finally doing something with his life. Said about a 47-year-old man's lateral move at a logistics company. Said in the same conversation where my confirmed booking of 51 people for an author event was met with the suggestion that someone else could handle it. I finished the tea. I set the cup down. I did not call him back. I did not revise my plans. I did not stop by Caruso's after. The week before the launch was the most focused I had been in months. That is the thing about having something real to prepare for. It clears out the noise. I was not thinking about Caruso's. I was not thinking about Patrick's title or my father's tone on the phone. I was thinking about the room on Commerce Street and the 51 people coming and whether the caterer had confirmed the dietary restrictions and whether Sylvia's flight from New York was landing on time. Sylvia Okafor and I had worked together for the first time 7 years ago on a shorter project, a long essay that became the seed of her first book. She is one of those writers who knows exactly what she wants to say and needs someone else to help her find the order in which to say it. That is most of what editing is. Finding the order. Knowing which argument has to come before which other argument. Knowing where the reader needs to breathe and where they can be pushed. She had called me 8 months into this project on a Tuesday evening in July to say that she didn't think the book was working. I said, Tell me which part. She said, the middle. The whole middle. I think I've been writing around the thing instead of at it. I said, I know. She said, you knew? I said, I've been waiting for you to know. We spent the next 6 months rebuilding the middle. 3 structural overhauls. 11 drafts total. There is a chapter in the final book, chapter 6, about the way daughters learn to make themselves legible to fathers who never developed the language, that Sylvia wrote and rewrote 7 times before it was right. The 7th draft is one of the best pieces of writing I have ever worked on. I told her that. I meant it. The book was called The Untranslated Daughter. The title was hers. I had suggested 3 others. Hers was better. The room at the Hartwell Grill seated 60. I had reserved it for the week of the launch and confirmed the booking 3 times. Once when I made the reservation, once for weeks out, and once on the Monday of launch week, the same Monday my father called. The room had warm lighting, round tables, and a small raised area at one end where Sylvia could speak. The caterer I had worked with twice before confirmed the full menu: roasted vegetable platters, 3 kinds of cheese, good bread, sparkling water, 2 bottles of red, and 2 of white per table. I had sent the invitations 6 weeks prior. They were simple. Cream cardstock, black ink, my name and Sylvia's name and the date and the address. No elaborate design. The books speak for themselves, or they don't. 51 confirmed by the Sunday before. 3 more confirmed by Tuesday. 54 total. I did not mention any of this to my family. My colleague Ren Ashworth, we went to graduate school together, she works mostly in academic publishing now, and she has known me for 22 years, called me on the Wednesday before the launch to ask how I was feeling. I said, ready. She said, I heard your father's having a dinner for Patrick the same night. I said, you heard that? She said, your mother called my mother. You know how that works. I did know how that worked. She said, Delia, how long have we known each other? I said, 22 years. She said, in 22 years I have watched you edit 9 of my friends' manuscripts, talk 3 writers out of quitting, rebuild 2 books that were unsalvageable, and turn down a staff position at a publishing house because you believed in what you were doing on your own. And I have listened to you tell me, at least a dozen times, that your father asked whether you'd thought about going back to school for something more stable. I said, Ren. She said, I'm just saying. Thursday is going to be good. Let it be good. I said, I know. She said, do you? She paused, then she said, I have watched you minimize yourself in the same breath that you're telling me you just finished a book that's going to matter. Stop translating yourself into his language. You're fluent in your own. I held the phone for a moment after she said that. I said, that's going in the book. She said, it's already in the book. Sylvia wrote it. You edited it. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in about 4 days. It was 11:23 p.m. on the Wednesday before the launch. I was at my desk with the final page proofs, not because I needed to check them again. They were done, but because I needed something to hold. The framed certificate from the editing fellowship I'd received 11 years ago was on the wall to my left. I had stopped seeing it years ago, the way you stop seeing things that have been in the same place too long. I picked up my phone. My father's number was there. I looked at it for a long time. I thought, I could call him. I could tell him what Thursday actually is. I could describe the book. I could say Sylvia's name and describe the chapter about daughters and fathers who never learned the language. He would listen. He might even understand for a moment. And then the call would end, and on Sunday he would ask Patrick how the new job was going, and he would not call me for 10 days, and when he did, he would not ask how the launch went. I put the phone down. I made tea. I went to bed. Thursday arrived the way important days do, quietly at first, and then all at once. By 4:30 p.m. I was at the Hartwell Grill with the caterer, walking the room. The round tables were set. The candles were lit, unscented, cream-colored, 3 per table. The raised area had a podium and a small stool, and a glass of water for Sylvia. The advance copies of The Untranslated Daughter were stacked at the entry table, 20 copies, with a small card that said, for the readers in this room. Sylvia arrived at 5:45. She came through the side entrance with her coat over her arm and looked at the room for a long moment without saying anything. Then she said, "Delia, this is exactly right." I said, "You did the work." "I just found the room," she said. "You found more than the room." Guests began arriving at 6:40. By 6:55 the room held 41 people, and the low sound of conversation and the smell of the bread the caterer had just brought out. By 7:04, the remaining 13 had arrived, and the room was full, and there was a quality to the air that I have felt in rooms before, but not often, the quality of people who are genuinely glad to be exactly where they are. At 7:04 p.m. exactly, the door opened one more time. It was not a guest on my list. It was a man I recognized, Bernard Thackeray, a senior editor at Sylvia's publishing house, who had flown in from New York that afternoon for a meeting and had come on impulse because Sylvia had texted him the address. He came through the door, looked around the room, and immediately said, "Where's Delia Ravenel? I want to meet the person who made this book what it is." Sylvia, from across the room, pointed at me. I had not been pointed at like that in a professional setting. I had been the one pointing for 17 years. I walked over. I shook his hand. He said, "I have been editing for 31 years. I have not read a developmental edit this clean since, honestly, I don't know since when. Can we have breakfast tomorrow?" I said, "Yes." 8 blocks away, at Caruso's on Fifth Avenue, my father was still waiting for Patrick, who arrived 41 minutes late. I did not know this until the next day. But I am getting ahead of myself. Sylvia spoke for 22 minutes. I have sat in a lot of rooms where writers speak about their work. I have learned to tell the difference between writers who are performing and writers who are thinking aloud. Sylvia thinks aloud. She stood at the podium with one hand resting on the advance copy of her book, and she talked about the 17 drafts. She said 17, which made me smile because I counted 11, which means she was counting the ones she didn't send me. And she talked about the chapter about fathers and daughters, and she said, "And I will remember this," she said. "The person who helped me write this book taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn, which is that the right reader doesn't need you to make yourself smaller to be understood." My editor, Delia Ravenel, spent 14 months reading me at full size. This book is what happens when someone does that for a writer. The room applauded. I was sitting at the table nearest the podium with my glass of sparkling water and my program and my hands in my lap, and I did not stand up. I just sat there and let it land. All of it, the room, the applause, the sentence. The 17 years of acknowledgments pages, and "That's nice, honey, and have you thought about going back to school?" I let all of it be in the room at once. Bernard Thackeray, from the back table, raised his glass in my direction. Wren, sitting to my left, put her hand on my arm and did not say anything. She did not need to. At 8:22 p.m., my phone lit up on the table. I turned it face down. At 9:15 p.m., after the last guest had left and the caterer was quietly clearing the tables and Sylvia was signing the last 3 advance copies for people who had lingered, I picked my phone up. 3 missed calls. All from my mother. 1 text from my brother Patrick. It said, "Where are you? Dad's upset." I put the phone back in my coat pocket, the navy wool coat I'd hung by the door when I arrived, the one with the deep pockets. I helped the caterer fold the last tablecloth. I said goodbye to Sylvia at the side entrance. She hugged me for a long moment and said, "Breakfast with Bernard is going to change things." I said, "Let's see." She said, "Delia, let it change things." I walked to my car. It was a clear March night, 41 degrees, the kind of cold that is bracing and not unpleasant. I sat in my car for 3 minutes before I drove home. I did not call my mother back. I did not text Patrick. I drove home with the radio off and the windows slightly down, and I thought about the sentence Sylvia had said, "The right reader doesn't need you to make yourself smaller to be understood." And I thought about my father waiting for Patrick at Caruso's, and I thought about the 41-minute wait, which I still didn't know about yet, and I thought about Bernard Thackeray asking where I was. I had been in the same place for 17 years. Nobody in my family had asked. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be seen by the one person who decided, a long time ago, to look the other direction. I had spent enough time standing in that particular sightline. I was done turning toward it. My mother called again at 8:14 the next morning. I was already up. I had slept well, which surprised me, and I was on my second cup of tea when the phone rang. I answered it. She said, "Delia, what happened last night? Your father he's upset." I said, "I had my launch event, Mom. It went well." She said, "You couldn't stop by after? Patrick was asking about you." I said, "Patrick arrived 41 minutes late to his own dinner, from what I heard. I don't think he missed me." Silence. She said, "How did you know that?" I said, "Ren's mother told her. You know how that works." Another silence. Then, "Your father feels like you were making a point." I said, "Mom, I had a professional event that I had planned and confirmed for 6 weeks. 54 people came. An editor from New York flew in and asked to have breakfast with me this morning. I was not making a point. I was doing my job." She said, He wishes you would have come, even for an hour." I said, "He didn't call me about it until Monday. The event had been on my calendar since January." She said, "He didn't know." I said, "He didn't know because he has never once asked what my calendar looks like, Mom. He has never once asked what I'm working on. In 17 years. I've told him. He doesn't retain it." She was quiet. I said, "I love Dad. I'm not trying to hurt him. But I'm also not going to cancel a professional commitment that 54 people were counting on because he scheduled something on 48 hours' notice and expected me to rearrange." She said, "He wants to talk to you." I said, "I'll call him this weekend." I had breakfast with Bernard Thackeray at 8:45 that Friday morning at a diner 2 blocks from my apartment. He ordered black coffee and eggs and talked for 40 minutes about the untranslated daughter and then about the state of developmental editing more generally, and then at the end, he said he had 3 manuscripts at the house that needed the kind of work I did on Sylvia's book, and would I be interested in a consulting arrangement. I said I would send him my rates. He said, "Good. Sylvia warned me you undersell yourself." I said, "Not anymore." My father called on Saturday afternoon at 3:19 p.m. I had been expecting it. I sat down at my kitchen table before I answered. He said, "Delia." I said, "Hi, Dad." He said, "Your mother said your thing went well Thursday." "Your thing? After everything. Still your thing." I said, "It did." 54 people. Sylvia's publisher flew in from New York. I had breakfast with a senior editor at the house yesterday, and he's sending me 3 manuscripts. Silence. He said, That sounds good." I said, "It is good, Dad. It's what I've been building for 17 years. Another silence. A longer one. He said, I didn't realize it was that kind of event." And here is where I had a choice. I could have said, "Because you never ask." I could have said it the way it was true. Not cruelly, but plainly, the way I would say it in a manuscript note. This sentence isn't landing because the reader hasn't been given the context to understand it.
Give them the context.
I said, "Dad, I know Patrick's promotion matters to you. I'm glad he has the new title. But I've been doing work that matters for a long time. I need you to know that. Not because I need the approval, I've been fine without it, but because I think you actually want to know me, and right now you don't. You know the version of me that didn't go back to school for something more stable. That's not who I am." He didn't answer right away. I understand my father in a way that took me a long time to earn. He is a man who wanted a life with a legible shape, title, office, table at the restaurant where people knew his name, and didn't get it. Patrick gave him a proxy. Patrick's promotions are my father's promotions. In the accounting, he does at night, when the house is quiet. He is not withholding recognition from me to punish me. He simply cannot see my life, because it doesn't match the shape he taught himself to look for. That is a wound that predates me. I didn't put it there. I cannot heal it. I can only decide how much of my own visibility I sacrifice to manage it. He said, "I don't think I've been fair to you." I said, "No." He said, "I want to hear about the books. I want to tell me about this one. The one Thursday was 4. I told him about Sylvia and the 14 months and the chapter about daughters and the title and the 7 drafts of chapter 6. I told him about the sentence she'd said at the podium. He was quiet when I finished. Then he said, "She said that about you?" In front of everyone. I said, "In front of 54 people and a senior editor from New York." He said, "Delia." He didn't say anything else for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry I wasn't there." I said, "I know, Dad." I said, "Come to the next one." He said, "There's going to be a next one?" I said, "There's always a next one. That's how this works." Patrick called on Sunday. He sounded, as he often does, slightly surprised to be in a situation that requires an apology. He said, "Dad said I should call." I said, "Okay." He said, "I didn't know you had a thing Thursday." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "Was it good?" I said, "It was very good, Patrick." He said, "Good." A pause. I was 40 minutes late to dinner, by the way. Traffic. I said, "I heard." He said, "Dad sat there for 40 minutes by himself." I said, "I know." There was a pause, and then Patrick said, with something in his voice that I had not heard before, something that might have been the beginning of an understanding, "He does that for me a lot, doesn't he?" I said, "Yes." He said, "He doesn't do that for you." I said, "No." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "That's not right." I said, "No, it's not." It is 8 weeks since Thursday the 19th of March. I signed the consulting arrangement with Bernard Thackeray's publishing house. 3 manuscripts. The first arrived last Tuesday, a memoir, 412 pages, written by a woman who spent 30 years as a librarian and has a story that deserves to exist in the world. I started reading it that night. My father called me on a Tuesday 2 weeks ago. He had looked up Sylvia Okafor online. He said he found a review of The Untranslated Daughter in a newspaper. He said, "It mentions you."
The review.
It says, "Masterfully edited." I didn't know they put that in reviews. I said, "Sometimes." He said, "I've been thinking about what you said. About not knowing you." I said, "I know." He said, "I want to do better." I said, "I know, Dad. I'll let you." I am not waiting for a transformation. I am not holding the accounting open, waiting for the 17 years to be repaid. That debt will not be settled in one conversation, and I am not interested in the debt anymore. I am interested in what comes next. There are people who spend their whole lives auditioning for the one audience that decided, before the curtain went up, that they weren't the lead. I auditioned for long enough. I know what I am. The room on Commerce Street knew what I was. Bernard Thackeray knew what I was. Sylvia knew what I was for 14 months before she stood at the podium and said it in front of 54 people. The work speaks. That is the thing about real work. It speaks without your permission and without theirs. Being unseen by the wrong people is not the same as being invisible. I was never invisible. I was just in a room my father didn't know how to enter. You cannot make someone learn your language. You can only decide how long you're willing to wait at the translation desk before you walk out and start speaking in your own voice. Recognition that has to be demanded is not recognition. It is a concession. And concessions are not the same as being known. My name is in the acknowledgments of 23 books. Soon it will be 24. One day it will be 40. My father will learn to look for it. Or he won't. Either way, the books will exist. Either way, I will keep building. If you have spent years doing the invisible work, waiting for the one person who should see you to finally look, I want to ask you something. What would it look like to build something so visible that the room finds you first?